Hi, everyone. This is Alexander Fernandez with Video Games Real Talk. We got a special guest today, someone I've known for many years, if not my entire career, and I'm very honored that he decided to come onto our show and be a part of this fantastic journey called Video Games Real Talk. We have Neil Haldar of Haldar and Co. Neil, how you doing this beautiful morning?
Good morning, Alex. I'm great. I'm so honored to be here, and it's great to be on Video Games Real Talk. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for waking up at like 5:30 in the morning because we can't do this at a normal hour. We always have to do it so bright and early. And I know you're a bright and early type of guy.
Indeed, I am. I am a bright and early. I love getting up early. That's exactly right.
Let me ask you something about getting up early, which is, not on the script, but do you believe in the philosophy of like Ben Franklin, this entire early to bed, early to rise, makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise? Or is it just you just wake up early?
I mean, that's a really good question. I like Ben Franklin, but I don't know if I like him that much to, to buy into all of his philosophy. I think getting up early
What
for
do
me
you
is
mean?
great. I just think getting up early is great. I love getting up early where there's the quiet and the stillness of the morning. I can take my time. I can read my data sources. I can read the news. I can read Wall Street Journal. I can check in and see what news has happened in the games industry. And it's a moment for me to sort of like collect and reflect about what I should do today to make today great. That's why I get up early.
That is some very good wisdom right there. And I think in the end of the day that the idea of waking up early is it can sometimes feel like it's a lost art in video games because I know a lot of people like to be night owls, which I totally understand. I used to be a night owl, I think, when I was in my teens, and then I got a job, and unfortunately, I can no longer be a night owl. So I'm like, waking up, and certainly not as a parent where the kids wake up at like 5 a.m. and then I mean, they basically tell me to wake up.
Right.
But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So Neil, for the audience out there that don't know much about you, I think they probably do, but let's get into it. Who are you? What do you do? What's your jazz?
I have been making video games my whole life. I haven't done anything else with my career. I've been doing it for nearly 30 years. I've had the pleasure of working for a whole bunch of different publishers and developers. Um, and what I, you know, what, when I got started in the industry, I started my own development um, company. I started my own dev. Um, when that ended, I went to go work for a bunch of publishers. Um, and using a lot of this knowledge of publishing and development, today I am a consultant. I help medium to large size developers and publishers figure out how to be more successful, with the people they have, the operations that they already have, the portfolios of games that they have already built, and then I help them look towards the future of how should they be thinking strategically about what's coming down the road, from platforms to game types to even external developers that they should be working with, and how to pull all that together so that they are a stronger company and a better place to work.
So that is a lot. A career that spans 30 years deserves to be investigated further. I love the story of how you got started in the games, and I hope you don't mind sharing that with our audience because I think I mean, it really encapsulates video games. For one, don't think much has changed, but if you don't mind, could you share us a story of a young Neil in med school deciding to go into video games?
Yeah, so Alex, I was almost in medical school. My background's in molecular genetics, and I had always had this burning passion since I was a teenager to try out video games. And I reached this decision point in my life at the end of college, where on the one hand, I could go off to medical school, and I would probably end up telling a lot of people what to do as I ran around in a white lab coat, and maybe I would be saving lives. The other part that was burning within me was really trying to figure out, could I survive inside of this software world? And keep in mind, like when I would take breaks from studying things like biology or chemistry, what did I go do? I played video games. In fact, I did more than play them. I tried to hack them. I tried to flip bits on the insides of machines to try and be my own game shark and try to cheat my own way with saved game files and stuff. I did everything that I could. I played around with 3D engines and 3D modeling tools and Photoshop and all this other stuff because I was romantically in love with how it must be to go make video games. So I reached this point where sort of like I was about ready to run off to medical school and go take the MCAT. And I realized that this was my moment. If I didn't go try making a video game company, and if I didn't go try right now to see where that would lead me, I would forever wonder in the back of my head, should I have done this? Right? I would be probably a pretty decent doctor, but then I would have this, oh, long ago, wistfully, I could have, and I didn't. And so I decided to, right? And really, like, the decision for me um, was sort of put in front of me as I was thinking about this, because I lived in a small apartment just off campus. I didn't have a lot of stuff. Really, my computer and my television was like, those are the two big things. And I sat there and I thought, okay, all of this stuff could burn to the ground as long as I have my data off my computer. It doesn't need to be that machine, and I would be fine. I would survive. All my clothes could burn up, like, it wouldn't matter. And I realized in that moment that I could take the risk. So I did. I grabbed a bunch of friends, um, which was both the best thing and the worst thing that I could have done. Started a small company that lasted for a few months. Most of the friends tumbled out of wanting to work together. Um, and I ended up hiring employees. And about 7 months into it, we had a 3D engine up and running on an early 3DO dev kit that I had paid for, right, the to access. Um, and I happened to be I was going to all the CES shows before there was E3. So I was at Summer CES. I want to say this was probably Summer CES of 93, 94. Um, and I met Bill Gardner from Panasonic Interactive, and they had a sort of problem foisted on them. The 3DO system was being built by 3DO, right, which was being run by Trip Hawkins. And Trip Hawkins had been asked in the press, Trip, how much money is this game system going to be? And Trip sort of said an answer of $699, which was a few dollars less than Panasonic's cost to manufacture the machine. And the executives at Panasonic were furious with Trip. And they realized there would probably not be a way for them to go, oh, well, Trip was wrong. The real number is $999 or something. And so rather than pull out of the whole alliance to make 3DO machines, they decided to start a software publisher to make up for the lost profit that they had hoped for from the hardware side. And so I happened to meet with Bill. I told him my story. I showed him what we had built. He must have watched this little video loop on this terrible laptop at the time, probably about 100 times with his team. And he was like, you guys really built this? I was like, yeah, we really built this. And he was like, okay. He's like, you're where? I'm like, oh, I'm in Columbus, Ohio. And he said, okay. He's like, next time I go to Secaucus, I'll stop by and I'll take a look. And so he did. About 2.5 weeks later, sure enough. And Bill and I had a very real discussion that got down to brass tacks very quickly. And within 3 weeks, we had a signed publishing deal. And I got this lovely $1 million check from Panasonic to go deposit into a bank account. And I was in business as a game developer.
This is 1993, where $1 million really is probably like closer to $2 million in today's currency. And you're what, 21, 20? How old are you when this is happening?
Yeah, I was barely 21. I was just old enough to be able to sign the corporate documents and actually, like, have the power to bind the corporation into the agreement. Yes.
I mean, Neil, honestly, like, I mean, Panasonic in video games, 3DO, legendary, Trip Hopkins, Gardner. I mean, this is like the beginning. I mean, realistically speaking, the beginning of what effectively would become the massive industry. Obviously, Nintendo was always there, Atari had been there, but this is that, take me back a little bit to this because, I want to spend a little bit of time here.
Sure.
Summer CES, which, the show that then eventually ended up coming here to Las Vegas, but Summer CES, I mean, you have video game publishers, you got hardware. I mean, who is even there? I mean, is there like this, like, is it like what was it, Cantina Hall, or what do they call it, Can't Find You Hall? I mean, is that what it's like, or oh, I'm sorry, it's called Kensha Hall in the LA, the
you know
Convention
the
Center. What
the
was the size of this place?
oh, it was huge. It was I mean, it in comparison, what I remember is it was about twice the size of E3. Um, but it
Wow.
was but it wasn't just video games. It was CES, Consumer Electronics Show. So it was everything from speakers to stereo receivers to pagers and car alarms. Oh my God, the car alarms. Um, they would set them off all the time. And anyway, so you had all this other consumer electronics for televisions. You had all this stuff, um, and this was what they would exhibit. And video games was, like it was like the hardware companies came to talk about their hardware setups because people were there shopping for their living rooms and stereo systems in their cars and boats and all this stuff. And so because the hardware was there, I mean, hardware is nice and all, but it's not fun to look at by itself. And so what they did was they set up, stands, the same kinds of standees that sort of exist today at E3. And so you had these demo stations, these kiosks, where you could clearly see the hardware and you could clearly get instructions on how to play. But each game title had its own kiosk at each of the hardware companies' booths. And so there was a Sega booth. There was I don't think Nintendo exhibited at CES. There was certainly a 3DO booth. I mean, I remember this is back in the day. There was like a CDI booth, right? Remember
Yeah,
CD
CDI.
Interactive?
Oh my God.
So
Yeah.
Philips and Magnavox, I think, came
Yeah.
together and they had a joint booth.
Wow.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. But there wasn't coin op, right? Um, and while I think that there were PC makers, and they did have some games in their booths. They also showed off like the latest hardware, and look how awesome these cooling designs are in the tower case, and how about we have this brand new monitor that is with amazing resolution, but the glass tube weighs like 160 pounds, like all this stuff.
And it's fully square.
Oh, yeah, and it's fully square. That's right. Not this,
we
not
we
not
mastered
this
a four by
rectangle.
three. Here we are.
Exactly. And so you would run around and have these meetings. So great example. In a follow up CES, I had one of these kiosks, right, to exhibit at what would be the 3DO booth, and Panasonic paid for my kiosk, just like a publisher today would at E3. And so I was the drone monkey, right? I stood in front of the kiosk. I talked to the various retail buyers that stopped by. I'd show them the game. Somebody from Panasonic would be there to talk about the marketing points of it's a better 3D engine. It's our preeminent shooter on console. Da, 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 da. And that was my whole thing. And it was an incredible journey. It was eye opening, and Alexander. It was exhilarating. It was exhilarating, and sort of thinking back, to that moment, it's sort of like, well, I could have gone off to medical school, and like, how could I? Like, look at the amazingness that poured out of making this radical, crazy decision um, of going into video games. I never would have guessed.
No, and that's kind of the point. I mean, this is the reason why I want to kind of go into this. You've made a life changing decision at the tender age of 21.
Hmm.
End up getting a check, $1 million check from a massive hardware company. Still is a massive hardware company. So, take me through this for a second. Has publishing changed much from when you were signing that check? I mean, without having to get into all the details, I'm curious. Was it like a ruthless discussion? Was it like, brass tacks is in more like stabbing tacks at each other? Or was it, I mean, what was it? Was it amicable? What was it like in
It
terms of the
was.
deals back then?
It
Were they
was. It
actual
was.
deals? I mean, if you don't mind elaborating a little bit on
No,
that.
I don't mind. I mean, now we're talking about something that's a long time ago, right? I don't think Bill and I are acquaintances on Facebook and stuff. I mean, he could probably reach out and like kill me if he wants to, but I mean, I think I'm well past the engagement
Panasonic is going to
period for
send
this
out some
stuff.
people saying, "How dare you talk about our procedures 40 years ago?"
What I'll tell you is that they were completely amicable, right? Compared to the publishers of today, Panasonic was extremely understanding of, you're a new developer, you're in the middle of nowhere, talent is a giant deal for you to be able to run your studio. Um, the major benefit, however, that I ultimately sold Panasonic on was our cost. Our cost of labor was not West Coast prices, and so, and I literally, I had put together a budget as best as I could in Excel, and I was naive, and I shared the entire sheet with Bill and his team, but
Oh,
but the number was a lot less, and even Bill commented, he's like, you're you're two-thirds the price of what we would normally spend for a title of this caliber. He's like, I,
wow.
I can't help but say yes. And here's the funny thing, when it came time to um, put a publishing agreement together, Bill said, we don't have one yet because we're still so new. Why don't you propose one? So I did. I found a local attorney who had done software work at AT&T, and T, and we worked feverishly. This guy, I remember his name, Stephen Hill, attorney at law, had previously been an engineer at AT&T, and had recently gotten his law degree. And so we worked hand in glove to build a contract that actually was pretty fair to both the publisher and the developer. I put in my own, things of the obligations I had to deliver and the obligations that Panasonic had to deliver, and we made it all assigned to California corporation law and the whole thing. And it took us a couple weeks. We got a draft out to Bill, then we got a final out to Bill, and then I think somebody else at Panasonic came back and said, "Actually, we find this to be very fair. Would you mind if we use this as our standard publishing agreement for the rest of our developers?" I was like, no, that sounds great. They signed it. I signed it. I got a check, and we were in business.
So what happened, man? I mean, what an amazing story right there. I mean, you guys are literally laying down the infrastructure for a publisher, a hardware manufacturer in the 90s. You're making games. I mean, come on. I mean, at that point in time, 93, I think Dr. Dre's album is just hitting, and same with Snoop is coming out in 94.
Right.
So, I mean, this is like, you got some great music coming out here now. I mean, I know you're in Ohio, so I don't know how down you guys were, but, you know, I mean, I don't know if it was Garth Brooks playing over there or what. I don't know what you guys were listening to in Ohio at the time, but I'm just curious, what happens? Take us through. So you got cash,
Yep.
got money in the bank, you're ready to roll. What goes down?
So we roll into development. We've got our 3D engine. We think we've got tools. Turns out we don't really have tools. We have to go back and rebuild tools and rebuild tools and rebuild that whole tool pipeline, because the way we thought it was going to work didn't work out that way. It turns out that the GDD we put together was not nearly as comprehensive and detailed as we needed it to be as we actually started into game development. And so immediately we started running late. Now, at the time, like I would have told you, if you had asked me at the time, I would have said, things are pretty normal. But I think with the weight of wisdom of today, I would tell you things were pretty foobarred. We hadn't properly scoped the game. We had not properly looked at how much time it was going to take. We had made some fairly good, but ultimately wrong guesses at how much time we would spend on tools versus actual production of the title. So we got to a place where we were upgrading our 3D engine to handle more graphics and um, more logic, right, of sort of the shooter that we were building. And remember, this is a time where there wasn't really a GPU, right? This was all off of one processor. Um, and so there were a lot of trade-offs as to how much could you draw versus how much intelligence and how much NPC knowledge and so on and so forth. Like how much of the game could step forward between each draw of each frame. And so as we were working on this, we were also trying to optimize our engine. And we went to the first E3 in 95. Again, Panasonic had a booth for us. They covered my travel, but I had a small team of like 4 or 5 guys, and I wanted them to really see what I saw. Right? I thought, I'm going to take the whole team with me to E3. This is going to be awesome. So I did. We stayed at a downtown hotel in LA, not that far from the convention center, um, and we went to E3. And I was at the booth most of the time. My guys would orbit and go check out other games. I thought it would be really important for them to see what the competition was doing, to see what else was coming down the pipe. Um, and unfortunately, met my 2 star programmers. And post E3, after we got back, they were recruited out from under me. The worst decision I ever made was to bring the engineers to E3, and learned it the hard way.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. Wow.
It was
I
too bad.
didn't know that.
Yeah, it was too bad. I'm friends with her today, and I think she's a star, and I like her very much. But I don't think she knew the full extent of sort of like bankrupting my little developer in the middle of nowhere. Of the one precious thing, it was the hardest thing for me to replace was talent because of our location. Um, anyway, so with those 2 guys flying the coop, Panasonic got very nervous. Um, the guys tried to set up their own development company and become their own dev. They reached out to Panasonic to try and get a deal. Panasonic, as I recall, said no, or said, we have to wait or something. Um, and so I did the thing that, we all end up doing. We have crunch. And so I went back to my roots. I, got brushed back up on how to write in regular flat C. I started taking stabs at code. Inside of 6 weeks, I was starting to fix bugs in the code. 8 weeks into it, I was repairing 3D math problems in the engine and solving vexing problems we had had for some engine performance issues, which freed up logic, which freed up the ability to go stick in menus and an interface and all this other stuff. And so, believe it or not, even though we were supposed to be done by August or September of '95, we shipped a first gold master candidate in December of '95 to Panasonic. They QA'd it. They came back and said, "Oh, there's this new hardware problem with saving, sort of with the save game on 3DO in non-volatile RAM. So you have to use this whole new procedure. Like the documentation just came out. You must have missed it." I said, "Okay, no problem." We fixed it in a week. Double checked it to make sure that everything else was working. We made a handful of other little improvements, and we shipped the second gold master. I want to say it was like December 10th of '95. But Alex, what else happened in 1995? What other massive Christmas story happened in '95? Do you remember?
PlayStation.
That's right. So Sony
PlayStation.
shipped the
Yeah.
first PlayStation, and I was waiting on pins and needles through December, waiting for Panasonic to tell me that it had gone to manufacturing, that it had gone to the presses, and all this other stuff. And instead, after Christmas, I got an email from Panasonic saying, "We really think you should come to California. We have this all hands meeting. It's very important." So I did. And at this meeting in Santa Clara, I learned that Panasonic Publishing was going to end. They were going to terminate their publishing business. They were exiting the 3DO business, that they effectively were conceding to Sony. And so all this hard work, all this money, all this other stuff was down the drain. And I fought like hell as best as I could of like, well, there's all these other ways that we could work. And there's like this successor to 3DO that might be coming out. I think it was called like M2 or something. Like maybe we could build it for that and so on and so forth. And Panasonic said, yes, but we already gave you a bunch of money and you can't do anything with it because it's ours. We paid you for it. And that's when I realized sort of like the clock had struck midnight and you know, we were all pumpkins. So I went back to Ohio. I sent copies of all of our material, raw art files, raw code, compiled binaries, all of our notes, all of our tools, everything. It all got shipped to Panasonic on discs, and I think even on DAT tape that we'd used for backups. Um, and I let everybody go. I gave severance to everybody. I negotiated the exit with the landlord. Was trying to figure out how to dissolve the corporation. I sold all the stuff to pay off debts and so on and so forth. I closed the bank accounts, and that was it. That was the first step in the journey, and it was wonderful. It was amazing. It was also the worst of times, and it was really hard.
I mean, wow. I that is, I mean, that's brutal. You didn't even have the chance to see and to compete in terms of seeing how your product did. You literally got leveled at the highest level. The platform pulled out, and that's man. I mean, I can understand how hard it was to basically come in there and have to do the work after you've lost two of your talented people and still ship a game, and you fought through it all only to have your platform say we can't compete. Do you ever look at the material you have? I mean, do you ever just look at it and think
Every
about it?
couple of years, yeah, every couple of years, I pull it out. I take a look at it, and I go, "Oh man, those 3D graphics are horrible." And like, we had no idea how to really build like meaningful loops of gameplay. But then the flip side is, you know what? We also did some of the right things, right? We actually built proper finite state machine code so that enemy units would patrol right inside of their area. And if you alerted one, you would alert others down the road that could cast a ray inside of the 3D engine and have a chance to be able to see you, right? And we did a die roll to figure out whether or not the farther the distance, the less probability, but they might also see you and become alerted and start shooting at you. So like we actually did a whole bunch of things right. And after I shut everything down, I sort of took stock of my life and I was sort of like, like I actually figured out how to do this, right? Sort of by trial by fire. But I actually like we were doing all the right things. We just got caught at the pass. And so by July of '96, I decided that this was my career, that this was my calling, right? Like it was such a heady rush to be able to go to these trade shows and be able to work on this project and be able to put all this together and synthesize, my love and my passion for things like how do things sound, or like storytelling, or software and graphics, and the business angle of like how do you fund it, how do you pay for it, how do you make money from it. Um, I said I got to throw in the towel on the medical path and do this video game stuff full time. And so by August of '96, thanks to friends in California, everything that did not fit in my car either got sold or put into a dumpster, and I was gone. I moved to the West Coast and never looked back. And I ended up working for a bunch of publishers.
Do you ever? I mean, are those two guys still in games? Or are they just gone?
Man, I haven't talked to them in a really long time. It's a really great question. I don't think they're in games. I know that one is doing cybersecurity kind of stuff, and the other I'm not exactly sure. Um, it's funny looking back. We used to. You'll totally appreciate this, and so too may parts of the audience. But it's like you when you're young and you're really into like what's happening sort of across the internet in the darkened corners of the net, you really think hard about conspiracy theories and who really has control and what's really going on, and are the chips really stacked against you. And I think in our young age back then, when I had my development studio, like we were joking around and thinking like maybe these were real things. I think both of them ended up really subscribing to some of those beliefs. And so I think that they have strong beliefs around things like the Illuminati, and who really controls currency, and richest families and richest people on earth really do control the destiny of billions of others and things like that. And it's sort of like that's the stuff you talk about when you're a college student, or when you're really young and fresh out of college, right? But I think that's what they really believe, and I think that's what's guided their futures and their career paths, and which is I think largely taking them out of games.
Wow. I
And look,
mean,
look, game.
listen. I mean, the dark web in like 94, 95, 96, unregulated. I mean, I don't even want to know what type of shit you guys were reading. I mean, it's like, I mean, were you guys downloading the anarchist cookbook and someone was wearing some tinfoil around his head? I mean, my God, this is like,
Actually, yes, I remember we had a whole meme going on around how the government was trying to get to you through cheese, and the way to make sure that the cheese was clean was to try and make your own. Yes, we had a whole,
wait,
and it
hold
was,
on, to make your own cheese. You mean we're talking about cheese?
yeah,
Or
like
wait,
the
cheese
food
like
product.
cow? Wait,
Yeah,
what?
like dairy cheese. Yeah, 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 yeah. It was a whole. It was like
I
it
mean,
was half
brother,
a
this is
joke.
Ohio. I mean,
Have you seen like the crazy people that live in Ohio? You haven't
I mean,
seen
I'm
them, huh?
from
But
Utah,
yeah,
so I mean, I can kind of
yeah,
relate. But
you
I mean,
know,
honestly, like
yeah,
I'm
you
sitting here
know.
thinking. I mean, let me just ask you guys something. Were the cows in on it?
Brother, if you've never cow tipped, you
I
haven't
know.
lived.
Hey, you know what, man? I mean, I just, okay. Well, Neil Halder, I tell you, every time we talk, there's always something that comes out that I'm like, I'm blown away by it. Neil, let's go through this. So you get out of your developer. You start. You leave Ohio finally, and you get
Right.
I can only imagine this. I'm just imagining the final scene in Goodwill Hunting, except it's Ohio instead of Boston, and you're driving to California. Here's the thing. You go from, Ohio, your own studio, to then California and working for a variety of publishers.
Hmm.
You work for some amazing publishers. And, I know that we're going to get into mobile here in a second, but I'm just curious, did you ever suspect that mobile was going to become a thing while you were in California, knowing full well that, cellular phones, I mean, Zach Morris has got a phone that's the size of a brick. So, I mean, did you ever think you were going to be doing anything on that as you were heading that way?
Well, I don't think. At the various publishers I worked at, like the phone was just a tool. It was just a phone. It didn't have a large screen and all this other stuff. It was this, piece of plastic with a heavy battery, and you used it in emergencies and things like that. Um, Eventually, the answer is yes, but it wouldn't be for several more stops in my career until I got some. Excuse me, until I got someplace where the 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 devices started to have color screens and had the ability to have content loaded on them. And when we got to that point, I kind of looked at that and it's kind of like, oh, okay, well now it has some features and some functionality. I wonder if, right, and sort of take that to a logical extension, right? Sort of like, I wonder if someday it'll have a larger screen. I wonder if someday it'll have a D-pad. I wonder if someday it'll have some way for me to be able to put real software on, like real amounts of memory and storage, or a real processor. And that's where things got very interesting. Um, so yeah, I would say that at some point it was clear and obvious that as Java started to show up on phones, you started to get color screens. You started to hear about how in other markets, and increasingly in the U.S., things like screensavers and ringtones and pictures on your phone and all this other stuff like started to become a thing. You start and as a result of picture messaging, which made the carriers a lot of money. You'll remember at one point this wasn't free. At one point, you paid for each of these messages.
Yeah, I know, right? And it was like what, 10 cents a message or something. It was
Yeah, I mean,
ridiculous.
and then if it came from a quote unquote foreign network, it was 50 cents because they had to translate the graphics on the back end, right? Because it was between two different devices or between two different networks that had incompatible picture standards.
So when you were still at MGM, you were still at MGM when Nokia came out with the Face Taco, weren't you?
Face Taco?
Do you remember the Nokia phone that looked like a taco?
Oh
That with
yes,
that was
Engage,
EDC?
the
Yeah, the
Engage.
Engage. Were you still at MGM when that came out?
I think
It was like 90, or it
so.
was like 2003, 2000. I want to say it was like 2003, 2004 because I
I think that's
remember.
right. Yeah, I think that's right. And so
I
yeah,
mean,
I was there, and I remember reading about the N gauge, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. I don't know how well this is going to work, but it was interesting because I remember talking to the guy from Nokia, super smart guy, still friends with him. But his philosophy was like, how many Game Boys did Nintendo sell last year? Like, and the number was something like 22 million or 25 million, and his comment was like, yeah, that's how many phones we shipped in the last 3 weeks. We know how to build this hardware. And it's like, okay, that's a solid number.
we know how to build the hardware. We're just not sure if someone wants to put something that looks like a taco to their face. But
The start of mobile games was really going through the carriers and having to work with the hardware guys. There was no app store. There was no software store that I, as a publisher, could directly vend to. I had to go through a carrier portal, right? Through a Verizon, through a, at the time, Singular, now AT&T. I had to go through Sprint. I had to go through Vodafone. There was no way for me to be able to sell directly to the handsets. Um, and it was a horrible business model. It was really hard. Um, Here's the example, right? Motorola Razer. You might remember the Razer. For some of the listeners, you might want to
oh yeah,
you might Google it, but it was a really popular phone from Motorola. There were multiple versions of the Razer. It looked the same. It was all the same aluminum clamshell, beautiful, thin, sleek phone. It went through multiple iterations with multiple versions of operating systems, and didn't even it didn't even run the same version of Java across
wait,
all the
what?
systems,
Are you shitting me?
and even had different processors in different versions of the phone. So when you went to go make a game, you'd make a game for quote unquote the Motorola Razer, but you literally had to make the same game 8 times over because
Oh
of
my
all
god!
the little intricacies. And each of these were called a port. And so in the old school mobile games, you made the
Wow.
game once for like a reference platform, and then you literally made thousands of ports, and there were port houses that were highly specialized at this. Sometimes it was memory constraints, like what's a really good example? I think I'm sort of pulling this from memory. I could be wrong, but like there was one version of Razer on Verizon that had 64 megabytes of memory because Verizon was sure that picture messaging was going to be a big deal and they wanted more RAM in the device. For other carriers, it was a 32 megabyte size, and so the availability of like really critical operating system pieces like heap and how much memory would be there and what kind of processor was in the device, it was all different. It all ran Java, but then even the flavor of Java and the version of Java from device to device was all a mess. And I remember going to in Barcelona Mobile World Congress. I don't even remember what year this might be, maybe '06. And I met with Chris Melisinos, who is the chief gaming officer at Sun. He's a good friend of mine today. But when I met him in Barcelona, I pulled him aside. I wanted to wring his neck. And I looked at Chris and I'm like, how dare you? have so many different versions of Java. The whole idea was that you write once and it runs everywhere, and you've allowed the manufacturers to run off and dismantle this whole dream of Java. There is no write once and run everywhere. It's write once, and I have to mutate it 1,000 times to be able to reach 80% of the market. I spent $50,000 to make the game and $250,000 to build all the ports because it's all by hand. It's all hand labor with engineers who have this extremely deep level of knowledge for their brand of handset and processor and family. And Chris looked at me and he goes, "You're right. We needed the money. You're right."
Did you think it was going to get this big? That mobile games would become what effectively is one of the largest places for people to game? I mean, was that obvious to you, or let's say when you're at Sky Zone, do you think that, oh yeah, this thing is going to be huge. This is going to be like be beyond console. Tell us a little bit about that.
Skyzone had investments from SK, it's sort of a sister company to SK Telecom. And so we had sort of internal knowledge of what the South Korean content partner marketplace looked like for SKT. And it was robust. It was not a small part of their business, it was a very, very large part of their business. South Koreans paved the way, really, in terms of having a robust economics system and frankly, robust market economics for content partners that showed the rest of the world what else is possible, what else can you go do. Japan wasn't that far behind, right? NTT Docomo had some pretty great programs in place where NTT Docomo, they took 8%. They just took 8% for back end billing and transactions, but everything else was on the content partner side. You had to set up a server, you had to run your own customer service, you had to figure out your own methods for refunds and charging and so on and so forth. But they only took 8% because they were really just sort of just a pipe that was in the system. And ultimately, I think that when 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 Apple talked about and ultimately Steve Jobs introduced the iPhone, there was that aha moment. There certainly, for me, there certainly was, because I had seen with my own eyes, sort of like the quality of games that were available in Korea were like nothing that were sold in the United States. They were light years ahead of what we had seen on these flip phones and these feature phone handsets. And so when Apple came out and said we're building this iPhone and it's going to be OS 10 based and it's going to have real memory and it's a marriage with the iPod, so it has real storage, has a camera. I literally was just like, that's it. He's done it, right? Like all that ingenuity, like they've done it. They've brought. It's now basically a computer. It has an operating system. It's connected to the internet. It has a web browser. It has maps. It has there was prognostication at the launch of iPhone. When do they open this up to third party software developers, right, to third-party ISVs, independent software vendors? And sure enough, within I think a year and a half, I think in 2007, maybe 2009, I think, is when the App Store was finally open and launched. And it was a fully featured, well-rounded, like somebody or a lot of somebody sat down and really thought about how do we provision a software store. They already had the success of iTunes, and so people were already going to iTunes to buy music and starting to buy movies and television shows and things like that. And so they just hung games and software applications as yet another content type that you could vend through iTunes. And it was powerful and it was democratizing in ways that I don't think any of us had really figured out. And in the meantime, in the background, while in the US we were still paying for all these games and all this software, in other markets, notably in Japan, they had figured out this zero sum game a long time ago, and they had figured out how to build something called free to play and how to charge as you go. And that was fascinating, absolutely fascinating to learn about and to see morph when those business models finally emerged in the US and in other Western markets.
Do you remember the moment that you played a free to play game and thought, "Oh my gosh, this is it"?
It was on a Japanese handset with a buddy of mine who was visiting from Japan. And he said, "You've got to see this thing. It's amazing." And I was playing it and I was like, "Oh, this is actually it's like a 16-bit hack and slash. Okay, that's really interesting." And I rapidly hit this wall of difficulty. And the game was built in Flash and ran on the Japanese handset. And I reached a spot where I think my character ran out of energy. And it was like 90 yen or something to continue, or maybe it was 900 yen to continue. And then I got like tons of energy at 900 yen. And I sat there for a second. I'm just like, so it makes you put money in as you play. And he's like, yeah. He's like, isn't that cool? I'm like, huh. I'm like, it's like the original coin op model, right? In coin op, as your character dies, you shove more quarters into the machine,
Hmm.
and your character continues. And I looked at that and I'm like, that's freaking brilliant. That's brilliant, right? There's definitely a way here for game companies to take advantage of this. We know how to do this. We've already been building arcade games, and you put quarters in when your character dies in thousands of games. This is no different. We've sort of married that keep sticking a quarter in model to this game system that's always in your pocket with games that you want to play. And then when Apple said, "Oh, we're going to allow these notifications to come along," and so now the game can tell you, "Come play with me." Oh my God! Like, okay, you just completed the round trip. That's amazing, right? That was pretty awesome. So yeah, that was the first time that I interacted with a free to play game, and that was my initial thought. It's like Coin Op Arcade has met, um, games in your pocket.
So one of the things that ended up happening here is that once free to play came, it was like it revolutionized the entire mobile, really the mobile landscape,
Entirely.
and you started to see basically some very powerful players emerge. You started to get these dominant top 10 lists where they've been the same top 10 for years. When you look at it now, obviously we've had a couple years of free to play. I mean, it's been at least a decade now, really, of
Mm-hmm.
free to play. If you're a studio starting right now in the mobile space, is it even possible to compete? I mean, I'm really curious about this. Like, we talk a lot about game development and the business of games, but obviously we talk primarily console and PC. We do kind of get to mobile,
Mm-hmm.
but really, is it a place where people can make money? Can the little guy or the little girl can they actually get into this space still and win?
Absolutely. But it will take perseverance. And you have to realize you're not really building a games business. You're building a service business. And your service is electronic entertainment.
I mean, this is like sage wisdom here, but sometimes it's complicated, Neil. I mean, I'm like,
So here's,
unpack this, brother.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm a layman. Help me understand.
The easiest way for me to describe this, and when I talk to other people about this, and they go, "Huh?" Like I understand what you're talking about. I say, "Okay, well, imagine you're McDonald's. You want to make the tastiest burger that's out there, right? And making the best burger, whatever ingredients has the most amazing menu of ingredients, and it's fresh and whatever, it's tasty. Um, that's like traditional game development. You build the best burger. There's a line of customers to go get those burgers, right? And if you make really great burgers, people are going to come from miles over, and they're going to want your burgers, and they're going to tell their friends and all this other stuff. But being in mobile games is like running the restaurant. It's not just about making the best burgers. And in fact, some restaurants, because of their location, because of how easy it is to get in and out, it has less to do with the quality of the product. It has more to do with the ease of the transaction, the ease of getting in and out, the ease of checking the box of, did I have a meal, right? And so you have to keep in mind, and you have to remember that where mobile has grown up from was from making great burgers, but now really being in a service level business. So in that same restaurant analogy, yes, you care about whether the burgers are being made and are they tasty and so on and so forth. But you know what you also care about? How many customers are showing up in line? Do I have the right prices? Do I have availability of all the ingredients on a regular basis? Do I have the right staff? Am I looking at all the service metrics that are required on a regular basis? Am I open at the right hours? Am I in the right location? What if I change the colors in the lobby? What if I made the menu print larger? What if I made my drive-through lanes wider? Or if I increase the volume of the speaker at the drive-through stand? What if I put a guy or a gal out in a uniform with a wireless headset so he could take orders or she could take orders before the car showed up? Well, how else do I advertise to my customers to tell them that I'm here? Could I get customers not from the local 3 miles, but how about the nearest 5 miles? That's the way that mobile games think. And so when you go to make a mobile game, if you are a young studio just getting started, yes, you have to go build the game. Don't worry so much about exactly building the right game, because unlike some games for console or PC, mobile is infinitely malleable. You can continue to make changes to your game. You can change graphics. You can change the way the menu works. You can change the way that customers are approached, how they learn, the tutorial, what character guides them through their first few minutes of the game. How do you interact with the user? What kind of messages do you throw from the look and feel to the copy to the text? Does the buy button go in the upper right corner and is it blue, or should it be orange and be in the bottom right corner or the upper left? Do you put the close box for all your dialog boxes in the center, in the left, the right, at the bottom? Do you put a big close button, or do you make it really tiny in a corner? You can make all these changes on the fly in real time because the app on these devices now, they're super intelligent. They interact with a lot of cloud data. So these systems are super malleable, and all you really care about are the service metrics, right? So how many people went through your store yesterday in your game? How many of them chose to buy something? How many of them put something in their cart to go to check out and then abandoned their cart? So it really, if you think about it, the malleability of the app is really melding web e-commerce statistics, like you're running a web e-commerce shop, right? All the things that you would worry about if you were selling computer parts or dresses or teas or handcrafted items on Etsy. Like those are all the service metrics that you care about inside of your game. It just so happens that the format and the mall of your e-commerce system is a game. And so now you worry about all of your game service metrics. Well, how fast do end users run out of energy? How fast do they run out of bullets? What would make them want to continue to come back and keep playing the game? Well, what does that take? And you can compare as you make changes to the game and you make changes to how the game looks and feels, you can observe the changes in your metrics and your statistics. Do more people come to your shop now that the close button is in a different place? Do more people open the store because you changed how the store operates and the format of the menus? Do you now see, like, maybe instead of selling a single $4.99 health pack, now you break it down, there's a 99-cent and a $3.99, and maybe they have different levels, and maybe you experiment and you try different levels for different people. How about different levels for different people who have never bought before? And how about for the people who have never bought before, now you start shoving ads in their face because you want to try to monetize all the back end infrastructure costs that they're incurring with never giving you money? How about the people that do buy things? How about if they, on average, they buy things at least $9.99 in price? Would you ever show them a 99-cent item? Maybe occasionally, but probably not. If you know that they're buying stuff at $10 at a clip, you're not going to take them to the dollar store. You're going to take them to the higher end store, and you're going to show them a whole nother level of what you can sell to them inside of your game eShop. So as you think about mobile games, yes, the game is the hook. You have to think about it in terms of I run a shop, I run a store, and I care a lot about the health and the vitality of the customers who walk through my store. And so to put the finer point on that, the reason why free to play works so well is because the entry bar to get in is nothing. It's nothing for people to walk into your store. It's nothing. The thing that you do care about is that over time, 0.5% of your audience will make up half of your revenue. So, how many users do you need to be playing your game at any one time for at whatever their average purchase price is? How many of them do you need to be transacting in your store every week, every month, every quarter for you to be able to pay for your development needs, your salaries, your overhead, the cost of making your game, the profit that you hope to make? How many of those do you need? And now you can start to see the really interesting metrics come out of this, things like cost of acquisition, right? So if I know my average customer spends $10 a week and they're going to stick around for, let's say, a week and a half, my average customer is going to spend $15. By the way, these are very inflated, very lovely, well above average numbers, but I'm just throwing them out there. So let's say you've got an average customer at $15, and so everybody you walk in the door is going to give you $15. You know you need to make at least $5 profit, right? And your actual cost to be able to service that person while they're there is another $5. So you could spend up to $5 of their total 15 that they're going to give you in marketing and advertising costs to acquire that user, right? You can dial into this much greater, right? And you can have much greater precision. Maybe when you talk to, let's say, males 18 to 28, they spend $20. So maybe you could spend $10 to acquire those users. But females 48 to 65, they're only going to spend $5. And so you can only spend really a third of that $5 to go acquire them, about $1.50, $1.75, $1.00 And so you can set these programmatic limits within your advertising buys, right? Because the way that all this stuff works is that you go to a place like Facebook or Google or something, and you buy your advertising to entice people to come to your restaurant, to come to your game, by setting maximum limits on how much it costs for you to get an install. So you can look at, like, it really becomes this giant numbers game, and you're running a business, you're running a service. It is not the same, Alex, I know you're thinking already, and you've been thinking for a long time. It is not the same as building a console title that ships on an optical disc or is available as a digital thing, and then later you build some DLC. It is completely not the same.
I mean, the thing is, what you just broke down, I think is it's really important for people to really digest what you're saying. I mean, it is really very much about the fact that you're building a store that just happens to sell a video game that needs to be basically treated with the level of service that you only get by running people businesses. Because ultimately, in the end of the day, you need to entice, engage, monetize, drive to purchase. You have to basically keep them the retention up and keep people coming back. And so it is the ultimate business challenge. And yes, the game is important. I mean, the game's got to be good, but I think you do bring up on a point. It's like, yeah, the game's got to be good, but honestly, the service needs to be better because that's what's trapping the people. And in a good way, you're bringing them back because the service is amazing, because it is frictionless, because you can get that data that you can review. And in a way, there's a meta game going on, right? The game
Mm-hmm.
is just the reason to come, the service is the reason to stay. And the way you win is by understanding how those two interact and being able to measure and be very responsive to the information that you are getting, which by itself, just as a business owner, those are the data points you want anyway. But honestly, to then focus it in on a product, I can imagine how this is not a two-person operation. So this is the thing. This is why I'm asking. Like, okay, I'm a group of four people. Me and my boys, me and my girls. We got together. We make this game. It's starting to take off. Like, how the hell do we find these people to come and help us, like, build services and understand how do you even make this happen? Because honestly, like, let's be real about this. Most game developers are not service people. I mean, we can barely
Right,
communicate.
right.
So how are we all of a sudden becoming masters of advertising and like understanding that, I go to Facebook, I get this CTA, this gives me this idea to purchase, like, really, because I mean, we're venturing into very different worlds. So, from your experience, I mean, you must have seen this. I mean, what would you advise the young team that's doing this?
Wow. If I were advising a young teen doing this, what I would say is, think first that you have a shop. Think later that you have to build the perfect game, right? Because the software is malleable, it's never done. It will never be done. You will always be improving it. You can ship the beta version of your game and start to find an audience, right? More important is that you get into the discipline of, I look at the data, I make changes to the game, I submit a build update, or I make changes to the product that then are expressed in the versions of the game that are on end users' handsets. I wait a little while, I look at the data, I make some interpretations, I make the changes, I push the changes to the end user, I wait a little while, I look at the data, and it becomes this nonstop, sort of discipline revolving door. And the shorter you can make that time frame, right? Like at Gree, we had 1 week sprints. We would ship the game, if you will. We would publish the latest builds generally Thursday and Friday, with rollback protection in case we screwed up or something, squeaked out of QA that shouldn't have. We would allow all of our fresh marketing to run over the weekend, which is also when most people are on their phones and they're interested in downloading new apps. We would have an early data team come in, sometimes even Sunday night, but usually by Monday morning, everybody was chewing through the data. Those data analysts would then provide some insights and some thought process around what was different, what was better. Of the 100 experiments that we tried tinkering with in the last week, what worked, what didn't work, and then here are recommendations for the following week. PMs would take that, prioritize the list as to what they think would move the needle the most in the business in the next 7 days, and then go forth and charge with teams on an agile basis, do daily stand-ups, push to QA starting by Wednesday, by Thursday, smoke test, by end of Thursday, smoke test, make sure everything is working, push builds on Friday, marketing is doing their thing on the side, trying to figure out who's the new user, who do we attack this time, what sort of like new user group do we go after, what segment of user do we go after demographically, on what platform, using what advertising creative, so on and so forth. and you'd run all that stuff that same weekend, right? And then on Monday you'd sort of wash, rinse, repeat. And if you do that consistently in that discipline, week over week, you win some, you lose some, but hopefully over time, you gain 0.5%, 0.2%, maybe you lose 0.4% here, but eventually you do that 10, 15, 20, 30 weeks in a row. Hey man, you're up 10%, you're up 15%. That's a meaningful number. And if you've been doing the right thing, you don't have 1,000 people a weekend playing your game, you have 100,000 people a weekend playing your game. And if they're monetizing at 20 to 30 cents per day, 100,000 people, that's real money. That is real money. And so that's the kind of thing that you start to look at, and that's the long haul of being in the service business. When you ship the game in mobile is when the journey starts. Whereas in traditional video games, when you ship, you're kind of finished, you're kind of done, unless there's expansive DLC plans.
I mean, just I just got tired hearing this. I mean, honestly, it's like the discipline, the cadence.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the war never ends. I mean, it's endless war,
Yeah,
and you have to
it,
like it.
that's right. And so imagine being a games guy. Like I was just chatting a couple days ago with the lead designer for Candy Crush. He's been designing the same game for 9 years. Can you imagine being that guy? An awful
No,
lot of
no,
people.
thank you.
So think about this for a second. Yeah, but think about this for a second. Like the kind of
I mean, you
talent
got
that
to
it
be into
requires.
it. So,
Mhm.
I mean, you know what? Actually,
Yeah, that's
let me
right.
rephrase this. Yes, I can because I've been doing the same business for 20 years, but
Right.
you got to be into it. Like, you honestly got to be like Neo in the Matrix, and those little flips of bits and those little changes that hook people that lead to the score. I
Yep.
get that's exhilarating.
The way that we have been approaching traditional video games, console and PC, is really like film. We build one giant product. It takes us forever to go do it. It takes a mountain of people to go do it. But once it's shipped, it's off to the markets. It's off to the races. Whereas in television, you can continuously iterate the script. You can kill characters, you can add characters, you can build whole new sets and take people to whole new different places. You can do this based on feedback from the audience. You can do this and sort of interpret what data you're getting. You're in an episodic business, and so very much in a very very micro way, the the mobile games business is truly that episodic business that we talked about a decade ago in PC and console, and we wondered when that time would come. What it turned out is that it just arrived on a platform we weren't expecting, right? And it's happening in a way that we didn't exactly predict. But to be successful at mobile, you have to understand you are constantly selling a television show to your audience. You send them tune in messages, right? This weekend, huge event, the princess is going to get captured by the Green Army. Good news, we've got green armor and green weaponry for you to buy, and it's only 20% off just for you, but you got to visit by Thursday night. And so that's the kind of stuff you do in mobile games. In console, you would never do some of this stuff. This is blasphemy almost in console. But in mobile, this is
We're
how
too
it
cool
works.
for school, you know that. We could never, I mean, why would we lower ourselves to do such a thing? Says some console
So I want to.
people,
So
but
let's talk
let's
about that.
make
No, no,
some
no.
money. No, I
Listen. So
get
listen to
you.
this. Why
I mean,
lower ourselves? Did you just say lower ourselves?
well, no,
Screw
I'm
you,
just saying
pal.
what
Look how
some
much money
people. I'm
mobile is
just
making.
saying. I'm just saying what some people would say. I'm not saying that's what I'm saying, but
$100 billion
I have
business
I
this
have
year.
circulated in networks that basically look at mobile as being that's cool, but let's sell, sell, sell. I mean, that's like the car lot where they're trying to sell you everything. Now,
That's right.
I don't necessarily agree to that because hell,
Right.
business is great, and if you can
It's a
make
different
money by
business.
providing a great product, well then there you go, you have a market. But
It's a different business.
it is a different business. And so here's the thing. So let's okay, yeah, we're in it now. So console and PC guys, we know
I
this,
do.
we know the
We
snobbery of
both
the
do.
games industry, we
That's right.
can't be bothered, type of
Right.
thing like that.
Right.
We know this. And of course, if we turn everything into basically zero sum, it's all about how much money you make. Mobile is killing it.
Mm-hmm.
Mobile is like
Hundred
let's
billion dollar
rinse it.
business this year. That's right. It's huge.
Exactly.
It's
But
huge.
then here's the thing, because I still trace this back to this studio, this small studio that's coming up.
Mhm.
Okay, so they got the cadence, they got the rhythm, they're starting to figure this thing out. How are they buying the ads, which is the dirty secret of games, especially mobile?
Mobile
I
games.
mean, what?
It's
How
not.
did they buy this amazing traffic that basically costs more than the game to make?
So it's
Where'd they
not a.
get that money?
Yeah. So it's not a dirty secret. It's really not. It's a lot of data management that is completely alien to running a game studio, right? It has more to do, and you look more and more like the car dealership, like the restaurant, than anything else. It's all performance based, or it has been so far largely, right? And so you build IAB, right? Sort of advertising standard sized creative and graphics.
Right.
You upload them to a Facebook ads account. You charge the ads account with some cash off a credit card. Um, and you can start selecting the kinds of audiences you want your creative to be in front of, with what frequency, what time of day, what age group, gender, demographic, location, device profile, if they've liked certain things, if they fit certain ways of thinking, if they like electronics, or if they like mobile games, or if in some instances if Facebook thinks that they've already bought or already downloaded other games. You can mark all this stuff off. There's hundreds of attributes for you to be able to play with. It's almost too many. Um, and then you just start spending money, right? And what you're going to do is you're going to see how many people look at the ad, how many people click on the ad. When they click on the ad, they go to your App Store page. So how many people land on the App Store page? And depending on the platform, depending on how sophisticated you want to get, you can figure out how many of those how many of those that land on the App Store actually download the app and start to play. What you really want to do, though, is you want the whole soup of who looked at the ad all the way to the end of who transacted in the game and how much did they transact for. Because what you can then do is start to build these meaningful marketing segmentation profiles of, interesting. And I'll just pick something. Um, Mid to late 30 something year olds in Las Vegas are buying things with 15% more velocity than the rest of my user group. I should probably market more to them. So let me buy more ads with the same creative. Oh, and now I see my creative is getting tiresome and it's a little out of date. Let's refresh the creative. So the next time I run, just like the 1 week sprints for development, you could run the same sprints on marketing. And so this sprint, okay, well, now let me make the graphic, instead of the guy looking from the left, he's going to look from the right. And the background is now blue instead of red. And the call to action in the copy, instead of saying click here, it's going to be fight now. Now what happens? Let that run. Oh, okay, well, that kind of made more people click, but it was a different kind of more people. And maybe they're spending less money, or they'll spend more money, but it takes them longer engagement in the game. Instead of their first transaction happening in 5 days, their first transaction is now 7.5. And because most people aren't sticking around for 7.5 days, okay, well, now I got to go yell at the game team and be like, hey, I need users to stick around longer because they're transacting and I'm making more money, right? And I can model that. So those are all the sorts of things that start to come together that you're thinking about. So platforms like Facebook, platforms like Google, platforms, there's tons of ad networks. They'll all help you do all this stuff. Ad Colony. I don't want to name too many. Sorry. But like there's a whole bunch of different networks that you can buy the ads from. And vice versa, if you want to monetize your traffic, if you want to make sure that everybody sees advertising, some of these same platforms will now run ads inside of your game. And you can restrict it. You can restrict it in places where, okay, well, how about the traffic, the players who come, I paid for them to install the game, they've never given me money. After 7.5 days, they don't convert. After 10 days, after 15, after 30, they're still playing my game. They're burning up my money on infrastructure costs, but they're not really spending money in my game. Well, I'll start throwing ads at them, and some of the ads pay good money because it effectively mines out the user from your game into their game. Right? Those ads can be worth decent money to you as the developer, and you don't really need the traffic because they're just schleps. They're not giving you money anyway, and that's going to make up most of your audience, right? When 0.5% of your audience is going to make up half of your money, half of your revenue, right? There's this huge, probably like another 50% of your audience will never give you money ever. So those are the guys you put ads in front of. Those are the people that you don't mind if they get mined out and they go play somebody else's game. And that's also another way to make money. And you use the same ad network. And rather than inputting all the segment data on the front end of who do I want to advertise to, you provide the information about that user. Oh, he's in his 30s. He lives in Las Vegas. Maybe he's married. Maybe he has kids. Maybe he's a homeowner. You give that stuff to the ad network and it helps them profile who they want to put that ad in front of in your game.
Okay. So
Go ahead.
I love this business. I mean, honestly, I love this business. You're basically running an advertising agency that happens to have a game that people kind of want to come and play.
Yeah, it's bolted
Um,
on to the whole notion of the in-app purchase, right? But there's
yeah,
but there's whole businesses that do this. Like some of the, like if I say hyper casual games, like largely they don't have IAP, or if they do, the only IAP is to turn off ads, right? Um, and so hyper casual operates entirely within the ads model, and so it's a very short core loop experience inside of the game, and it's bookended. There's an ad at the start. You play for 30 or 45 seconds. There's an ad at the end. There may be an extended ad every 4 or 5 core loop game sessions that you have no choice but to sit through and watch. And that's how they make money, right?
okay.
If you so you do that 10 times or 15 times a day because the core loop experience is very short. Hey man, they just made their 15 to 20 cents on you. Thank you.
No, and so okay, so here's the thing. Let's just put it this way. I'm a well-heeled investor from a family office, PEVC. I
Mm,
got these young kids coming up to me with a major pitch showing me like, "Hey, we're the next Candy Crush. We're the next, I don't know, Clash of whatever the hell."
sure.
You know, how much money does it take to start these things? Like, what is the real investment here? I mean, they telling me they can do it for a quarter of a million. They
Nope.
can get this thing going.
Nope.
Is this real? Are they on crack?
They're on
What's happening here?
the reality is that this is a multi-million dollar input into the business, right? You're
Wait, what do you mean multi-million? Are you
Oh yeah.
serious?
Oh yeah. Just to build the game and get started with marketing and to try to figure out if your game idea is viable, you're looking at a couple $1,000,000 just to get started. And it has less to do with the cost of production. It has more to do with your efficiency of finding your audience. Nothing matters until you have begun to find your audience in free to play, and that could take months. It could take months of trying to figure out how do I iterate the game at the same time that I'm iterating my marketing programs, right? And even with the best intentions, even with really great game designs, even with really great marketing, it will take time. One of the problems that mobile faces is discovery is largely broken. It is very, very hard to go to an app store and to know what to go download if you want to find a new game to play. Most people either get recommendations from their friends or they may take a look at top downloads, like a billboard chart of top 100 things that people are downloading or something like that. And a great example of this would be a game that has just finally found amazing footing. The game is called Among Us from a developer called Inner Sloth. These guys shipped their mobile game in 2018. It's been waiting years to be found. They tried to build the right game. They iterated. They did some of their marketing. They couldn't find the audience through hook and crook. They were able to figure out that they needed to revamp the game. They were in the middle of making Among Us 2.0 when the first version hit and became this un completely unrivaled success from a game that was shipped so long ago. And the Inner Sloth guys have to be beside themselves to finally have been found. And so, in a weird way, it is very possible, right? And so, what I would give advice to, and what I would say is, it's never been easier to make the game, right? Making the game, however, is only half the challenge. And the other part of the challenge is that it's never been so hard to be successful in the game's business because discovery is very difficult, because this whole marketing and advertising piece is so complicated and is so orthogonal to traditional video game development. It takes enormous amount of very, very different backgrounded talent members within your team to go figure out how to go do this stuff, right? Your average video game developer isn't the guy who knows SQL and can traipse through a database and figure out like, here's the percentage of the users that are actually giving me real money and how much do they spend and how often do they spend and how long does it take for them to transact once they've installed and where else can I find more of them. That's not your traditional game developer. You need somebody who really loves e-commerce stats and wants to come work with you or work for you, right?
Yeah. And so this is the point. I'm so happy you said this. So it's not to say that the game doesn't matter, but like we said, the game can evolve. What really seems to matter is having the skill set to understand and measure what is effectively e-commerce. And from that standpoint, I'm an investor. I'm someone who's wanting to put money in here. I realize that the kids may tell me it's going to take a year to make the game, But realistically, what they need to be telling me is that we may make the game in a year, but it may take us 6 months to a year to find the audience, or in the case of Among Us, at that point in time, what, 3 years, 2.5 years? So I need to be willing to basically ride the rodeo of time, not necessarily money, though in this case, the salaries aren't free. So I need to be willing to spend the money as well. So when we're saying a couple million, I'm sitting down and I'm taking a look at this. Okay. What are we really talking about? Is it only two? Are we thinking five? Knowing full well economies of scale. I get that every country has their own different, cost base, but what would you advise me? I got money to burn. I'm like, you know what? I want to be the next, dominant player here. How much should I be prepared? Ballpark it for me to get the right people, the right team, and to give it the right time with no guarantee of success, but at least to know that my money was well spent. What would you think that would be?
I think if you find the right team that has an idea that's going to carry them forward, you're investing not in their game idea, you're investing in the team, that the team has the discipline
Yep.
to look at the data, wash, rinse, repeat, that they have the right complement of team members to think about it as a store and not just a game. They need to have really great game people so that the game is successful of its own right and that it's fun, because the one thing that that all this data will not tell you, there's no statistic for fun, right? Nobody can predict that
Yeah.
until you start to push the game out there. The good news is that because the product is malleable, you can change what the operations are that make the game fun. So you need a team that's flexible and has that discipline to be able to understand that. And if you find the team that can honestly do all those things and you have confidence in them, they're a rare gem, and you should put a lot of money into them. You should syndicate it with other friends so that you can share in that success and share in the hardship of it. It may take a long time for that team to find the right traction, and you have to have patience, right? The one thing that I will say is that unlike many other turns of hardware in the last 30, 40 years in the game space, for the first time ever, we have fairly stable platforms of creation. We have engines, we have Unity, we have Unreal. And for the very first time, these teams, if they build really interesting games and they have that bright gem of a team, they'll use one of these platforms to build their game. And that game, therefore, if they find success on one platform, the likelihood of being able to bring that success to other platforms and incremental investment that opens up a whole new line of revenue is very high. And so it's never been sort of easier from a construction standpoint of being able to be multi-platform and be able to go do these things. Now, Alexander, you know as well as I do that there's nuances on every platform, and so it's not a slam dunk. It's not
Yeah, no, true.
push
And
button, right?
I think that's important. I think, this is the thing. This is why I'm really wanting to have you express what you're saying, because in the
Yeah.
end, it's like it all sounds great until your money is burnt and the building is burning and it's no longer existing because nothing happened. I
Yeah.
mean,
So
video
the
games is it's a wild ride. I can only imagine when you add the mobile aspect of this, what you just talked about, it goes from being challenging to we're scaling Everest with one tank of oxygen, hoping to God we find one on the way there.
Yeah, but
I,
the difference is that I can modify the trip. I can make the clothes warmer. I can add a second bottle of oxygen. I can make the mountain less tall, or I can make that ridge less hard for my users to get over. I can make all these changes in real time, right? And as a result, I will immediately see the difference in my data. I don't have to wait a month if I'm
True.
on a week by week basis, right? So I can immediately make these changes, right? If you don't have enough oxygen, I can sell you more. If you didn't have enough oxygen to get started and you feel it's unfair, and I see a bunch of users falling off as difficulty picks up, how about I give you a bottle and a half to get started? How about I give you better instructions on how to use the oxygen? How about I make the summit look really close to you myopically so you think it's really close and that the goal is pretty easy. But when you actually try to go do it, it's really hard. Like those are sort of the tricks that we pull from games itself. That this is all the balancing stuff that we do in QA and PC and console games, but you do it live on the fly. And here's the reason why. Your average mobile game user is going to churn. They're going to stop playing your game at some point, and somebody else will replace them. As you get replacement players playing the game, they're going to play it differently. They may not like the pre-existing difficulty levels. They may be much better at dealing with oxygen, and they only need 1.25 tanks of oxygen. They may not be so interested that the mountain looks really close by. Maybe you need to make it look a little further away so that the challenge appears greater. And so you're constantly temperature checking and looking at data as to who's my audience, how do they feel about the game? Am I optimizing for fun and wink wink them spending money to be able to play the game? You're constantly making these changes. As a result, it's not the traditional games business. It's a service business. And you have to have that mentality. You have to think about that as the game maker. You have to think about that as the investor. You have to think about that even as the player, right? Because the game you play today may be slightly different in a week, and you have to live with it.
So you're in all your years making games, let's just say, what would you tell the young person coming into the industry and they had to make a decision, what platform am I going to get into? Where should they go? Is it, do you go into mobile? Do you go into console PC? I mean, do you start the services business that happens to make the mobile game? What would you guide them on?
Wow, that's a very good question. Um, I have a son who's 18. He turned 18 in January. He's been a
Congratulations,
gamer.
man. Look
Yeah,
at you.
thank
You're
you.
almost
Appreciate that.
done.
Nick is fantastic. I love him to death. I'm so proud to be his dad. Um, I would say if I were to give him advice, because he's a big gamer, and if he came to me and asked me for that advice, I'd tell him go work for a PC company. Go work today for a PC company that understands that the software can be malleable, that they can ship patches. They're not stuck in a week to week death march cadence. Um, they can live on Steam. There's a giant user base on Steam as a store. It's not that hard to get to. Um, the the fact that you're on a Windows platform means that you can be very active and involved in a community and understand your end users. You can do things on Kickstarter. You can do PR and discounts and try all sorts of things and be an early release and get some of this data. You can get all this stuff being on Steam, and you can get your feet wet. You can figure out, do you really like this or not? If you really do, if you love the challenge and you can't wait to see the data every Monday, as an example, um, maybe you belong in mobile games, right? Where you have an addressable space of 3 billion devices and counting, right? And everybody's used to giving you money, and you have walled gardens, and there's sort of rails that the consumers are on in terms of how they can spend money and where else they can input value. If you turn out in this journey that you don't like that data, if you really like the creative aspects of building the product, if you really enjoy the fact that the fidelity of the graphics are extremely high, and you're trying to push the boundaries of, well, how many frames per second can we get, how powerful can we make multiplayer, and there's a different precision in the interface of a keyboard and a mouse versus a fingertip on a glass screen versus a controller in somebody's hands. Maybe you belong in PC high end, or maybe you belong in console, and then you can go explore that further. That would be my recommendation if my kid were getting started in the industry.
I got $10 million burning a hole in my pocket, and I don't need that money back. Where do I put it? What would you tell the investor?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, Console is the easy bet. I got to be honest. Console with an extension into PC is an easy bet because the market is controlled. It's not a free for all number of games that can come to market and you can get clobbered by competition, right? You're still gated by first party content approvals and production release issues. It's still very much a protected market, as it should be, because trying to build for console is hard and difficult in ways that are very different than a service based business. However, your chance of success is higher than on mobile in terms of, do I want my $10 million back just to recover my investment? Go, go, go put your money in the console. But if you want to give your $10 million away and you want the chance to make 100, don't be in console. You have to be in mobile free to play.
And this is the part where that gambling like aspect to video games is so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly that. If I want to at least recover my 10 million, maybe playing console PC.
It's
But if I
safer.
want to turn it to 100 million, hell, if I want a billion, you got to let it ride in mobile. And that is a free to play experience. But, as we've just covered, as you just well went into, and I think gave a very succinct explanation of how this works, high reward, high sophistication, specific attention to detail,
Hmm.
and a willingness to go through death march sprints every week because it is a live service. It's not off. It never turns off. And I think that's realistic, Neil. And I really appreciate you giving that understanding to people, because I think a lot of people out there listening, they don't truly know the crazy that goes into this. And, mobile games, I mean, as much as I can sound condescending when I'm talking about it, it's not a condescension. It's just the fact that it is a mystery. It is literally like, it is arcane. I mean, you might as well be an alchemist turning copper into gold. And yeah, there's data. But yeah, more than anything else, if I take a step back, it is all the other things that have nothing to do with making games working in perfect concert, like an orchestra, arranged properly. That in that 5 day sprint that we're talking about, everyone is the best at what they do to be able to understand what services have to be delivered, what the advertising space looks like, how did we design the creative for the ads, how did we launch that, what is the response. These are things that, on their own are difficult, let alone attached to a video game. So that's the part that I find fascinating. And, you are super intelligent about this. I mean, this is the one thing I always love talking to you, is because you always make it easy sounding, even though you do put the warnings on there, which I do love. And, this is the thing, like, how do people basically, how do they reach out to you? I'm sure there are people in the audience right now wanting to know, like, man, that guy knows what he's talking about. How do I get a hold of Haldar and Co? How do I get a hold of the Haldar? How do I do this?
I love this business, Alex. It is hard and difficult, and yet it can do such amazing things for investors, for business, for all the opportunities that are here. To reach me, I have my own website. I run my own consulting business. It's haldar.co, haldar.co. My email address is Neil, Neil, at haldar.co. Or you can find me on Twitter at Neil SF, like Sierra Frank. Neil SF.
Neil Haldar, man. I mean, this thing could keep going for hours because I have so much I want to ask you. And I do have one last question before
Sure.
we sign off.
Sure, Alex.
Is it time now to invest in mobile games? Is it can we make a win, or is it honestly, like, 'cause, the money is out there, everyone's all the M&A, we got all these high flying VCs. Should they come and participate?
They should. They should, because the way that you solve the current discovery and marketing problems on mobile is by having recognizable brands, right? And sort of this whole brand licensing thing ultimately is what sort of brought us together originally, Alex. 20 some years ago, when we did work together on James Bond.
Yeah.
Um, the same problem now exists in the app stores. It's an infinitely sized shelf with millions of apps, of which 70% are games. How do you expect a consumer to find that game? Are they going to know about Among Us because you spend a bunch of money on marketing, or might they find a James Bond title? Might they find a Borderlands? Might they find some other name or brand from console or PC that is meaningful and interesting on mobile? There's never been a better time for companies to get funded in the mobile space. The forward CAGR, right? The annual growth moving forward is looking like 10, maybe even 11.5%. That's an enormous amount of growth. That's enormous growth for a business that doesn't have physical goods or physical inventory. It's all electronic, and you can make the changes as you go, right? You can metric the quality and the health of the business in ways that you can't on in other games businesses. Like literally from moment to moment, you could have a dashboard, a live services dashboard up, like like mission control at NASA. You can exactly see what's happening with your user base, with service availability. How long is the average ping to your user? You can do all that in real time now. And we did that at Gree. The best mobile games publishers out there do exactly this. And so there's plenty of ways to be able to control, protect, and ensure sort of support for your investments in mobile. There's never been a better time to invest in mobile. The business is always going to be changing. It's always going to be mutating. It's always going to be happening. The answer, sort of, to your question though is, when is it that I open my store? And the answer is yesterday.
Well said, sir. And I will say one thing. You are one of the most knowledgeable people in this space. And I would say
Thanks.
anyone out there that is listening, you should definitely ping Neil, at least at the very minimum, to hear exactly the insights you need to hear if you're going to go out there and spend 10 million. If you're going to go spend your life on this, I think this is something that you should be aware of. Definitely hit him up on Twitter. And everyone out there, I mean, this brings this edition of Video Games Real Talk with Alexander Fernandez and Stefan Baier to a close. I appreciate you all out there listening. Please follow us up on Twitter. You can hit me up at StarveUp. You can also go to www.starvup.com. You can follow us on Instagram and wherever you get your fine podcasts. As always, we are appreciating your listening. And of course, any comments or questions, please send them forward. Looking forward to seeing you all and talking about some more video games related business issues on the next edition of VGRT. I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care, and we'll see you soon.